I think, for us to imagine the position that Peter finds himself in. You know, he's worked hard all night, hasn't caught a single thing. He's probably frustrated and tired of dragging the nets in and out of the water all night. And now he has to figure out a way to go home and tell his wife that I've been gone all night and I haven't caught a single thing and I have nothing to show for it. I think some of us know this feeling. You know, it's that experience of having to go home to your spouse and tell them that you've lost your job. The experience of spending all day at work and working overtime and realizing that you haven't done a single thing that was on your list of things to do that day. Or worse yet, that you've accomplished everything on your list and you still don't feel any more fulfilled or satisfied. Or that experience of struggling with an illness and not being able to do the work that you were able to do before. Or the experience of not being appreciated by your boss, feeling like your skills aren't really being adequately used. This is where Peter finds himself on that morning on the shore of Lake Gennesaret when Jesus steps into his boat. And what's interesting is that Jesus doesn't ask for permission to come aboard Simon's boat. He just steps onto the boat and sits down and begins to teach. And of course he gives the great command and they lower the nets and make this great catch of fish. And it seems that this is how God tends to operate in our lives as well. And throughout Scripture we see it. The sense of God showing up, kind of invading our lives, and then making something happen and inviting us to come and follow Him. You know, we see it in the life of St. Paul. He was on his way to Damascus riding his horse when he got knocked off and turned from his way of persecuting Christians. Of course, it was left to St. Paul to decide what he would do after that encounter with Christ. In fact, he spent 3 years deciding how he would live, what this meant for his life. Or in a more modern example, we see it in the life of Blessed John Henry Newman. His conversion wasn't so quick, but he was a staunch Anglican, and for many years he debated against those in the Catholic Church. And over time, after further study and looking into the history of the Church and the writings of the Church Fathers, slowly the truth and the beauty of Christ converted him to the Catholic faith, and he eventually became a cardinal. Or we see it in the life of St. Francis of Assisi in a more sudden way, I suppose, when he saw Jesus speaking to him from the cross, asking him to rebuild his church, and so he left everything and followed him, sold all his possessions, and gave everything away to the poor. No matter how quickly it happens, this method of God happens over and over again. God shows up, makes something happen, and then invites us to follow Him. And this is important for us, because over and over again, God appears in our midst and asks us to cast our nets into the deep once again. To really look at the depth and the beauty of life. And the church doesn't ask us to do these things because we're bad people or we're wicked or we're wretched in some ways. The church is inviting us to see life in a fuller way, to appreciate the good things that God gives to us. And so there is this call constantly to lower our nets, to look at the full beauty of what God has given to us. And this can be a challenge, to really look at our own relationships. How often do we take the time to sit down with our family and friends and just ask ourselves the important questions of life? Where am I headed? Why do I do the things that I do? What do I spend the majority of my time doing? How often do we take time in silence just to look within our own hearts and ask God where it is that He's leading us? How often do we really listen for the voice of God and really go to the depths in our own life? And I know sometimes it's a little scary because you never know what you're going to haul in with that big net. You might pull in an old boot or somebody's old toilet seat or some nasty little fish. You never know what kind of stuff is going to get caught in that net when you cast it into the deep. And it's the same for us when we look into our own hearts. Maybe we're a little worried about what we're going to find there. Maybe we're afraid that we're going to see someone who is selfish, someone who is desperately lonely, someone who's just plain mean to people sometimes. There are some things, I think, in our lives that we would prefer to just kind of let settle to the bottom and not have to deal with them. And yet, acknowledging this brokenness, acknowledging our own sinfulness, is part of the process of taking the next step toward God. I mean, we see it in St. Peter. Lord, depart from me, for I am a sinful man. And yet 3 minutes later, he abandons everything and follows him. To acknowledge our own brokenness is part of what it takes for us to really take the next step toward God. This is a new beginning for St. Peter. And it can be a new beginning for us if we're willing to really take a look at ourselves and to take that next step toward Christ. This is the opportunity that is given to us to continually go to the depths. And we have to ask ourselves over and over again, who are we? Both as individuals and as a parish. Who is God calling us to be? What's God doing in our lives that is leading us to something greater? How is God working in us, inviting us to change? Because if we don't ask ourselves these questions, then we get stuck in some kind of shallow life. Our boat kind of runs up in the shore and we can't paddle anywhere. Our oars just kind of get stuck in the sand and we're not moving anywhere. We become like a bunch of chickens that kind of run around in the farm and kind of peck at what's at the top of the surface. But what the church is inviting us to is to go deeper, to look beneath the surface. Unfortunately, the church gives us a season of 40 days, 6 weeks, for us to really take a look at ourselves, to really have this opportunity for conversion. So if you haven't thought about what you're doing for Lent, what you're going to give up, or what you're going to take on, whatever, it's kind of crunch time. We've got 3 days left, so now we need time to consider what it is that you want to do. But as a parish, I would recommend that we begin to ask ourselves, how is it that God is inviting us to change? In what way do we need to grow as a parish? What is it that's beneath the surface that needs to be brought up so that we can become a greater, more alive presence in our community? To do this, it takes each of us to look within our own hearts, to acknowledge what it is that is there that needs to be addressed so that we can take that next step towards Christ, asking for his help in following him wherever it is that he might